What happens when two of the world's most famous figures clash on live television in a way that nobody saw coming? What happens when carefully crafted public personas crumble under the pressure of uncomfortable truths? Today, we're diving into one of the most explosive moments in recent television history, where Angelina Jolie left Prince Harry speechless and the entire studio audience gasping. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was a masterclass in how to dismantle someone's narrative, piece by piece, and it all happened in front of millions of viewers who couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrity confrontations on live TV. Do you think they're genuine or scripted? Now, let's get into what really happened when these two titans of fame went head-to-head. The View's studio was buzzing with anticipation as the show's producers had managed to secure what they considered a ratings goldmine. Prince Harry was scheduled to appear alongside Angelina Jolie to discuss their respective humanitarian efforts. On paper, it seemed like the perfect combination. Two globally recognized figures known for their charitable work and advocacy. The audience was packed with excited fans, cameras were rolling, and the hosts were ready to facilitate what everyone expected would be a harmonious conversation about making the world a better place. Whoopi Goldberg introduced the segment with her characteristic warmth, highlighting both guests' impressive humanitarian credentials. Prince Harry, dressed in his usual smart casual attire, smiled and waved to the enthusiastic crowd. Angelina Jolie, elegant and composed as always, acknowledged the audience with a subtle nod. The initial pleasantries went smoothly, with both celebrities discussing their current projects and the causes closest to their hearts. The conversation began. Innocuously enough, Joy Behar asked Prince Harry about his recent work with veterans, a topic he was clearly passionate about. He spoke eloquently about the challenges faced by military personnel transitioning back to civilian life, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had served himself. The audience was engaged, nodding along with his points about mental health support and the importance of removing stigma from seeking help. Angelina Jolie listened intently, her expression thoughtful and respectful. When asked about her work with refugees through her role as a special envoy for the UN Refugee Agency, she spoke with the kind of authority that comes from years of first-hand experience. She described visiting camps in Jordan and Lebanon, her voice steady as she painted vivid pictures of the human cost of conflict. The two guests seemed to be in complete harmony, both advocating for vulnerable populations and emphasizing the need for compassion and action. Sarah N. then posed what seemed like a softball question about the role of privilege in humanitarian work. She asked both guests how they navigated using their platforms responsibly while acknowledging their fortunate positions. Prince Harry responded first, launching into a well-rehearsed answer about the responsibility that comes with privilege, and how he tried to use his platform to amplify voices that might otherwise go unheard. I think it's important to recognize that with great privilege comes great responsibility, Harry said, his tone earnest and measured. I've been fortunate to be born into a position where people listen to what I have to say, and I don't take that lightly. Every time I speak publicly, I'm thinking about how I can use that attention to help people who don't have the same opportunities I've had. The audience murmured approvingly, and the hosts exchanged satisfied glances. This was exactly the kind of thoughtful, inspiring content they had hoped for. But as Harry continued speaking, something shifted in Angelina Jolie's expression. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she leaned forward in her chair, her body language suggesting she had something to say. I've learned that real change doesn't come from just talking about issues, Harry continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension building beside him. It comes from actually doing the work, from showing up consistently, from being willing to have difficult conversations and challenge systems that aren't working. I think that's what separates genuine advocacy from just celebrity activism. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Angelina Jolie's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. She turned to look directly at Prince Harry, her gaze intense and unwavering. The camera operators, sensing something was about to happen, zoomed in on her face, capturing the moment when her diplomatic composure began to crack. That's interesting, Angelina said, her voice carrying an edge that made everyone in the studio sit up straighter. I'm curious about your definition of showing up consistently and doing the work. Could you elaborate on what that looks like in practice? Harry seemed taken aback by the directness of her question, but he maintained his composure. Well, I think it means being present for the communities you're trying to help. Really listening to what they need rather than imposing your own ideas about what help should look like. It means being there not just when the cameras are rolling, but when the hard, unglamorous work needs to be done. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on anyone paying close attention. Here was a man who had left his royal duties and moved to California, talking about being present for communities while sitting in a television studio thousands of miles away from the UK. Angelina Jolie's eyebrows rose slightly, and a knowing smile played at the corners of her mouth. Being present, she repeated slowly, as if testing the words. That's fascinating. Tell me, how do you balance being present for the causes you care about with your other commitments? Your media deals, your book tours, your Netflix projects? The question landed like a precision strike. Harry's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered, but it was too late. The damage was done, and everyone in the studio could feel the temperature drop. Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly sensing that the conversation was heading into dangerous territory. I think it's possible to do both, Harry said carefully, his voice slightly strained. The media projects help fund the charitable work and raise awareness for the causes I care about. It's about finding the right balance and making sure that everything I do serves a larger purpose. Angelina Jolie nodded thoughtfully, but her expression remained skeptical. Of course, funding is important. But I'm wondering about the optics of it all. When you're constantly in the media talking about your charitable work, doesn't that risk making the work about you rather than about the people you're trying to help? The studio fell silent. This wasn't the kind of gentle, supportive questioning that guests on The View usually faced. This was a surgical examination of Harry's entire approach to public life, delivered by someone with decades of experience in both Hollywood and humanitarian work. The audience seemed to sense that they were witnessing something unprecedented, a moment when the usual rules of celebrity discourse were being completely abandoned. Harry's jaw tightened slightly, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. I think anyone who knows me or has worked with me would tell you that I'm genuinely committed to these causes. I'm not doing this for attention or personal gain. I don't doubt your sincerity, Angelina replied, her tone remaining calm but pointed. But sincerity isn't the same as effectiveness. And effectiveness requires a certain level of humility about what you don't know and what you can't fix just by showing up with good intentions. The conversation had shifted from friendly celebrity chat to something much more serious, and everyone in the studio could feel it. The hosts exchanged worried glances, clearly wondering if they should intervene or let this play out. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word as these two global figures engaged in what was becoming a very public philosophical debate about fame, responsibility, and the nature of genuine service. Harry shifted in his seat, his media training kicking in as he attempted to regain control of the narrative. I think we might have different perspectives on how to create change, and that's okay. There's room for different approaches in this space. But Angelina wasn't about to let him off the hook with diplomatic platitudes. She leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxed, but her gaze laser-focused. Different approaches, absolutely. But some approaches are more effective than others, don't you think? I've spent 20 years working in refugee camps, war zones, and crisis areas. I've seen what works and what doesn't. And what I've learned is that the most important thing isn't how visible you are. It's how invisible you can make yourself while still getting the job done. The subtle dig hit its mark. Harry's face flushed slightly, and he cleared his throat before responding. I respect your experience, I really do. But I think there's value in using visibility to shine a light on issues that might otherwise be ignored. Sometimes being visible is part of the responsibility. Visibility can be a tool, Angelina agreed, her voice measured and precise. But it can also be a crutch. When you're constantly talking about your trauma, your struggles, your journey of healing, at what point does that become more about processing your own issues in public than about actually helping others? The question hung in the air like a live grenade. The hosts looked genuinely shocked at the directness of the attack. This wasn't just about humanitarian work anymore. This was a direct challenge to Harry's entire post-royal media strategy. His decision to write a tell-all book, his numerous interviews about his family drama, his constant references to his mental health struggles, all of it was being questioned by someone with unimpeachable credentials. Harry's composure cracked. Visibly, I think, sharing your struggles can help other people feel less alone. When someone in my position talks about mental health, it gives other people permission to seek help. Does it, though? Angelina pressed, her tone remaining calm, but relentless. Or does it just make mental health into another form of entertainment? When you're being paid millions to discuss your therapy sessions, your family conflicts, your personal revelations, what message does that send about the value of privacy, of dignity, of handling your problems without turning them into content? The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. This was unprecedented territory for daytime television. Watching one global icon systematically dismantle another's entire approach to public life, Joy Behar attempted to lighten the mood. Well, I think we can all agree that mental health awareness is important, regardless of how we go about it. But Angelina wasn't finished. She turned to Joy with the same intense focus she'd been directing at Harry. Of course, mental health awareness is important, but there's a difference between awareness and exploitation. There's a difference between helping people and helping yourself to their attention and sympathy. Harry's hands clenched in his lap, and his voice took on a defensive edge. I find it interesting that you're questioning my motives when you've built your entire career on being in the public eye. You've been on magazine covers, at red carpet events, in tabloids for decades. How is that different from what I'm doing? The audience gasped audibly at the counterattack. Finally, Harry was pushing back, and the confrontation was becoming truly explosive. But if he expected Angelina to be rattled by his response, he was sorely mistaken. She smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. You're absolutely right. I have been in the public eye for decades. And you know what I learned during that time? That fame is a currency, and like any currency, you can spend it wisely or you can waste it. I spent years making movies, yes, but I also spent years learning how to use that fame to actually accomplish something meaningful. And you don't think I'm doing that? Harry challenged, his voice rising slightly. I think you're trying too, Angelina replied, her tone almost pitying. But I also think you're still figuring out the difference between being famous for doing good work and doing good work that happens to make you famous. One serves the cause, the other serves yourself. Sarah N. jumped in, clearly trying to diffuse the situation. I think both of you have done incredible work in your respective fields, but Angelina wasn't backing down. Have we, though? Let's be specific. I've helped evacuate families from war zones. I've lobbied governments to change policies that affect millions of refugees. I've worked with legal teams to prosecute war criminals. What specifically have you accomplished with your platform that couldn't have been done by someone without your title and your media presence? The question was devastating in its simplicity. Harry opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. Again, he clearly had examples in mind, but under the intensity of Angelina's gaze and the pressure of live television, he was struggling to articulate them effectively. I think, he said slowly, that's a very narrow way of measuring impact. Not all. Change is measurable in the way you're describing. Sometimes change happens when people feel seen, when they feel like their struggles are acknowledged, by you specifically, Angelina pressed, or by anyone who's willing to listen and actually do something about it. Because if it's the latter, then your unique contribution isn't your title or your trauma. It's your willingness to do the work. And if that's the case, then why does so much of your public messaging center on who you are rather than what you're doing? Whoopi Goldberg finally intervened, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen enough confrontations to know when things were getting out of hand. I think we're all passionate about these issues, and sometimes passion can come across as conflict. But Angelina wasn't interested in diplomatic interventions. She turned to Whoopi with the same intensity she'd been directing at Harry. Passion is exactly what this is about. The question is whether your passion is for the cause or for being seen as someone who cares about the cause. Those are two very different things, and they lead to very different outcomes. The distinction was razor-sharp and impossible to ignore. Harry looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. The audience was completely silent, processing what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a disagreement about charitable work. This was a masterclass in how to expose the difference between genuine advocacy and performative activism. "I think we all want to help people," Harry said weakly. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Wanting to help and actually helping are different things," Angelina replied. "And being seen as someone who helps is different from both of those. The question is which one you're actually doing when you write books about your family drama, when you do interviews about your personal struggles, when you make documentaries about your own journey of self-discovery. Who exactly is being helped?" By all of that, the silence that followed was deafening. Harry stared at his hands, clearly struggling to find a response that wouldn't make him look even worse. The hosts exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing that their attempt to showcase the humanitarian advocates had instead become a public evisceration of one by the other. "I think," Harry said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "that we might have to agree to disagree on this." Angelina's smile was cold and final. "We might. But the people who actually need help don't have the luxury of agreeing to disagree. They need results, not good intentions. They need action, not awareness. And they definitely don't need their suffering to be turned into someone else's redemption story." The words hit like a final blow, and Harry visibly winced. The camera captured every moment of his discomfort, every flicker of realization that he was being completely outmaneuvered by someone who had spent decades turning celebrity into actual measurable change. The studio remained in stunned silence as the weight of Angelina's words settled over everyone present. Harry sat frozen, his face a mixture of shock and humiliation. The hosts looked at each other desperately, trying to figure out how to salvage what had become a complete disaster for their guest, Sunny Hostin. Perhaps sensing that this was a moment that would define the entire interview, decided to push forward rather than retreat. "Angelina, that's a pretty harsh assessment, don't you? Think there's value in different approaches to advocacy." Angelina turned to Sunny with the same unwavering intensity. "Harsh? I think what's harsh is watching people suffer while their pain gets turned into someone else's brand. I think what's harsh is seeing real problems get reduced to talking points. In someone's media tours, if we're going to talk about harsh, let's talk about the refugees I work with who have been waiting for years for the kind of resources that get spent on a single promotional campaign for a memoir." The comparison was brutal and impossible to argue with. Harry looked up from his hands, his eyes showing a mixture of anger and defeat. "I don't think it's fair to suggest that writing about my experiences somehow takes resources away from people who need help, doesn't it though?" Angelina replied, her voice cutting through his protest like a blade. "When you're commanding millions of dollars for book deals and Netflix contracts, when you're taking up media space and public attention, when you're setting the narrative about what advocacy looks like, you're absolutely affecting how resources and attention get allocated. The question is whether that allocation is serving the people who need help or serving your need to be seen as someone who helps." Harry's face reddened, and for the first time in the interview, he looked genuinely angry. "You know what? I think you're being incredibly unfair. I've never claimed to be perfect, and I've never claimed to have all the answers, but I am trying to make a difference. And I don't think it's right to attack someone for trying." "I'm not attacking you for trying," Angelina said, her voice remaining maddeningly calm. "I'm questioning whether what you're doing actually constitutes trying, because from where I sit, it looks more like processing your own trauma in public, while calling it service, and that's not the same thing." The distinction was so clear and so devastating that even the audience seemed to gasp. Harry's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. He was completely out of his depth, facing someone who had spent decades not just talking about humanitarian work, but actually doing it at the highest levels. Joy Behar, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the interview had taken, attempted another intervention. "Well, I think we can all agree that any effort to help people is better than no effort at all." But Angelina wasn't interested in false equivalencies. "Is it, though? Because ineffective advocacy doesn't just fail to help, it can actually make things worse. When you reduce complex global issues to personal narratives, when you make charitable work about the charity giver rather than the charity recipient, you're not just failing to help, you're actively making it harder for people who are trying." To do effective work, the silence that followed was absolute. Harry stared at Angelina with a mixture of horror and fascination, like someone watching a master craftsman dismantle something piece by piece. The hosts had given up trying to manage the situation and were simply letting it play out. "I think," Harry said slowly, his voice shaking slightly, "that you've made your point very clear." "Have I?" Angelina asked, tilting her head slightly. "Because I'm not sure I have. Let me be even clearer. When you write books about your family drama and call it mental health advocacy, when you do interviews about your personal struggles and call it breaking stigma, when you make documentaries about your own journey and call it service, you're not helping anyone except yourself. You're turning other people's pain into your profit, and you're doing it while claiming the moral high ground." The accusation was so direct and so brutal that Harry actually flinched. The camera captured every moment of his discomfort, every flicker of realization that he was being completely destroyed on live television by someone who had the credentials to back up every word she was saying. "That's not," Harry started, then stopped. "I don't think that's fair." "Fair?" Angelina's eyebrows rose. "What's not fair is the single mother in a refugee camp who can't get basic medical care, while you're getting paid millions to talk about your therapy sessions. What's not fair is the veteran with PTSD who can't access treatment while you're turning trauma into entertainment. What's not fair is reducing real suffering to contend for your next media appearance." The words hit like physical blows. Harry looked like he might actually be sick. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. The audience was completely transfixed, witnessing what was clearly going to be one of the most talked about television moments in recent memory. Whoopi Goldberg, recognizing that this had gone far beyond anything they had prepared for, finally stepped in with real authority. "I think we need to take a breath here." But Angelina wasn't finished. She turned to Whoopi with the same intensity. "Do we? Because I think we need to have more conversations like this. I think we need to start asking harder questions about the difference between celebrity activism and actual activism. I think we need to stop being polite about performative advocacy when real people are suffering while the attention gets focused on the wrong things." The statement was a challenge not just to Harry, but to the entire system of celebrity culture and media coverage of humanitarian issues. It was a moment of absolute clarity about the difference between substance and performance. Between genuine service and self-serving publicity, Harry made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. "I think maybe we just have different definitions of what it means to use your platform responsibly." Angelina's smile was cold and final. "No, I think we have different definitions of what a platform is for. You seem to think it's for processing your personal issues in public. I think it's for solving other people's problems in private, and that difference explains everything about why your approach gets so much attention and accomplishes so little, while approaches that actually work get ignored because they're not about the person doing them." The final blow was delivered with surgical precision. Harry sat in stunned silence, completely unable to respond. The hosts looked at each other in shock, realizing that they had just witnessed something unprecedented in television history. Sarah N., perhaps sensing that this was a moment that needed to be preserved rather than interrupted, simply asked, "Is there anything else you'd like to add, Angelina?" Angelina looked directly into the camera, her expression serious and unwavering. "I think the most important thing people can understand is that real change requires real sacrifice. It requires giving up the spotlight, not seeking it. It requires making the work more important than the recognition for doing the work. And it requires being honest about whether you're actually helping people or just helping yourself feel better." About not helping people, the silence that followed was complete and absolute. Harry sat destroyed, the hosts sat stunned, and the audience sat mesmerized by what they had just witnessed. It was a moment of television that would be replayed, analyzed, and discussed for years to come. As the show went to commercial break, the camera lingered on Harry's face, capturing the complete devastation of someone who had just been systematically dismantled by a master of both celebrity and substance. Angelina Jolie had delivered a masterclass in how to expose the difference between genuine advocacy and performative activism. And she had done it with the kind of precision and authority that comes from decades of actually doing the work, rather than just talking about it. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen anything like this on live television before? Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments whether you think Angelina Jolie went too far, or if this was exactly the kind of honest conversation we need more of in celebrity culture.